2025 schedule is here. I'm Jacob Tissett. That's Craig Sandlin. And we're here to break down the schedule release. Craig, not the locks we thought we'd have in prime time, but still a lot of fun on this Bengals schedule to talk about. We got a Thanksgiving game. We got Monday night, Thursday night, Sunday night. A lot of fun coming up in 2025 for the Cincinnati Bengals, but it all opens up in week one, a divisional matchup this year in Cleveland against the Browns. I don't think anyone can make an educated guess on who's starting at quarterback in that game for the Cleveland Browns, but we know our quarterback will be Joe Burrow, and that always gives us a good shot. Craig, we heard about the schedule tonight at about 8 o'clock, and here it is, 18 games, a bye in week 10, right smack in the middle, and that is good to see. Very, very happy about that bye placement, but other than that, we got those divisional games. We know that makes up the whole season. What's your main takeaway from the schedule release tonight?
You know, it's interesting when you look at the initial opponents for 2025 when it came out several months ago, you look at it and you're like, all right, this feels like a winnable schedule. You can win 12 to 14 games. But then as it came out tonight, and I know a lot of people say, well, you already knew your opponents, but the schedule comes out tonight and I look at it and man, I think it's a little bit more challenging than maybe we were giving it credit to be. And the big storyline, as it's been the last couple of years, is going to be, can this Bengals team get off on the right foot? Because after those first two games that quote unquote should be cupcakes, it doesn't get easy. You've got 5 straight games against playoff teams before you face the Jets in Chicago before your bye. And then after your bye, you come right back with 4 out of 5 games against teams that are going to be difficult. And again, we're playoff teams. So much tougher schedule than maybe we were anticipating. And it's going to be a challenge, I think, this year. I'm a little nervous, if I'm being honest, Jacob.
I think that's a fair statement. Now, you know, it is some tough stretches of this schedule, absolutely. But I think after last year, opening up against what we thought was going to be a rookie quarterback, ended up being Jacoby Brissett, a very, very bad Patriots team, and taking that loss in week 1 that I think we all penciled in as a W all offseason, kind of taught us Bengals fans a lesson that, especially in those first 5 or 6 weeks, there are no cupcakes for this team, and you get no wiggle room this season. We know that affected us last season, missed the playoffs by just 1 game, being left out at 9 wins, and you look back at that Patriots loss and can't help but think one slipped through your fingers. This year you open up with a divisional matchup, and I know Jacksonville's supposed to be a cupcake as well, but that's another AFC team. If you start 0-2 this year, you can kiss those 1-seed hopes goodbye. And I know, the last 2 years we've missed the playoffs. Maybe us Bengals fans should reassess those expectations and focus on getting back in to the big dance rather than looking at the 1 seed and chasing the Chiefs or the Bills. But when Joe Burrow's playing quarterback and you've locked up Jamar Chase and T. Higgins for the next few years, I'm not thinking about anything other than a Super Bowl. So 2 AFC teams in week 1 and week 2, that's a tough pill to swallow for a team that we already know has to start fast this year. And that's not something that we've seen from the Zac Taylor Bengals over the last few years. And the one time they did, they made it to a Super Bowl. So hopefully we'll learn a lot about this team through the first few weeks. And then you mentioned it right there. You have a gauntlet made up mostly of those 3 dominant NFC North teams coming right after those 2 AFC games to open up the season. You got a primetime game against a Denver team who made the playoffs last year right above you. That's an absolute gauntlet to start the season for Zac Taylor and the Cincinnati Bengals. They've focused on starting fast all offseason. They said it in every press conference that it's going to be a focus, and they're going to have their work cut out for them through those first 5 or 6 games.
Yeah, Broncos team that gave you hell last year at the end of the year. You pull out a win in overtime in December in Paycor. Now you go on the road to Denver on a Monday Night Football showdown. Definitely not going to be an easy one. Bo Nix entering year 2 of his career.
And probably one of the better secondaries in football this year. Added Jahdae Barron in the draft, Defensive Player of the Year, and Patrick Surtain coming back. We know what the Bengals' strengths are. It's throwing the football, and a primetime game against Denver. If there's any team equipped to slow down Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, it's the Broncos.
Yeah, absolutely. If you talked about the bye week being well placed. You've got 9 games before and 8 games after. But if you told me that the Bengals had 4 or less wins going into the bye week in 2025, I don't know that I'd be that surprised. Right. Just the way that they've started in the past. The start is extremely slow. You'd like to believe that you start 2-0, but if you don't and you drop that game at Cleveland or even at home against Jacksonville when you open in orange, there's a very good possibility. Chicago with the new head coach we talked about yesterday, the New York Jets, who knows what they're going to look like this year under new head coach Aaron Glenn. I'm not ready to pencil in a whole lot of dubs on this team at this point, despite how optimistic I am about this offense, because of the uncertainty around how they're going to start, right? If you came in and you told me, okay, this Bengals team is going to start 2-0, that might change my perception, because I'm like, all right, we're going to ride some momentum. We're going to go into Minnesota. We're going to win that game. We're going to go to Denver. We're going to win Monday Night Football. We're going to get Detroit at home, and we're going to win that game too. And now all of a sudden you're looking at going to Green Bay at 5-0.
Right.
Well, what if you drop that Cleveland game? What if you stay slow in the beginning of the year and you drop Jacksonville too? Now all of a sudden, instead of what we had last year, where they started slow and then had a chance to bounce back when they got that string of games against the Panthers and then the Giants and the Browns, like, you don't have that this year.
No.
You don't have that stretch of 3 out of 5 games against mid at best teams. If you start 0-2 this year, you can almost pencil in starting 0-6 at that point, because the momentum is going to be so far behind you. So more than any other year, maybe that start might really impact how things are going to end. But the thing that is interesting to me is only 4 primetime games.
I thought that was bizarre as well.
The big talking point on social media tonight, the last 4 straight years now, primetime game at Baltimore, 1 p.m. game against Baltimore in Cincinnati. Each of the last 4 years, that trend will continue this year, playing at Baltimore on Thanksgiving. Only 1 AFC North primetime game at home this year, and that's against Pittsburgh, a team that I thought maybe we'd avoid in primetime altogether.
At least it's early enough. We won't get flexed out of it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, right? Is that we've got 4 scheduled primetime games.
Correct.
If you take care of business early on in the year, and let's say you go into the bye week at 7-2 or even 8-1 or something like that, you have an opportunity after that bye week at Pittsburgh, at Baltimore, at Buffalo, against Baltimore. You could certainly add more primetime games.
No question about it.
No question about that. The last 2 games of the year are abysmal. But if you need wins to get into the playoffs, you might as well be facing 2 of your easier opponents on the year in Arizona and Cleveland. So, and at home nonetheless. So that's going for them if they do need those wins at the end of the year. But hopefully by that point, they've got things locked up and they can just bench some starters against Cleveland.
That's right. I think that would certainly be the goal, seeing Cleveland in Week 18. Have to hope that the Bengals aren't fighting with the Browns for any kind of positioning and can rest their starters and take it easy in those last 2 weeks. I do think it's kind of funny to look at the schedule. You mentioned that stretch last year that kind of allowed the Bengals to get back on track, though they did fall short, certainly catapulted them to an elite back half of the season. It seems like the easiest 3-game stretch of this season is those last 3 games. A lot of questions about Miami, Tua coming back from an injury, Arizona and Cleveland, as you just mentioned, 2 of the more poor teams on that schedule. Other than those last 3 games, there's not an easy stretch in this schedule. I guess you could point to New England, who picked top 5 this year, but Drake May is a quarterback a lot of very, very smart people believe in, and I like Mike Vrabel. We saw what he was able to do in Tennessee with that team, led them to a number 1 seed in the AFC Conference. I would expect New England to, at the very least, be a scrappy team this year. There's not a lot of gimmies on this Bengals schedule, and that's something that really does scare me. As you mentioned, Craig, if they don't start fast, if they start slow, as we've seen over the last few years, this is something that could tumble into a really, really disappointing season. And it really sounds like a broken record, because I know this is technically the first schedule reveal we're doing a Chatterbox Bengals for, but if I had a mic in front of my face the last 2 or 3 seasons, I feel like I would have been saying these exact same things. You have to start fast. You have to get momentum behind you. You have to win the meaningful divisional games earlier in the season. And if the Bengals don't do that, we'll be the same place we were the last 2 seasons, looking at the standings at the end of the year, thinking, wow, we have an MVP quarterback, an offensive player of the year, a wide receiver, and maybe a deep Hoy at edge rusher. And we're still sitting here outside of the playoffs. Why is that? Well, it's the first couple weeks, and the story will be the exact same this year. The Bengals could drop a bunch of games in the middle of the schedule. If they start well and end well like they have over the last however many years, this is a playoff team and a real contender in the NFL, and that's all any of us want. I do think something that is interesting is a summer full of Joe Burrow asks. He's granted another yes from the NFL. He asked for T. Higgins. He asked for Jamar Chase. He asked for Mike Gesicki. He hasn't quite gotten Trey Hendrickson yet, but he asked for a holiday game. And we play Baltimore on Thanksgiving night. Joe Burrow gets his wish and plays primetime on a holiday. I'm sure Bengals fans remember a few years ago when the NFL instituted the Black Friday game. The Bengals threw their hat in the ring to be the annual team in that mix. Did not get picked for that role, but now thrust onto a holiday for the first time in as long as I can remember. And it's a game that the NFL can guarantee is going to be an absolute banger. Bengals at Baltimore, not Buffalo, is going to be primetime on Thanksgiving night, and there's no more sure thing in the NFL, right, Craig, than Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow going off in prime time. So seems like a layup in decision-making there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, the NFL kind of either teased people or trolls were rampant or whatever, but everybody had people really excited. They thought the Bengals were going to start the season week 1 at Buffalo on Sunday Night Football. Turns out that wasn't true. Started other rumors about different things, and it turns out that the one game that we talked about yesterday in terms of predictions for primetime games,
right,
I threw out there the Thanksgiving night game against Baltimore, and that was the one game we got right out of all of them. That is for sure the game to have circled on the calendar this year in terms of can't miss TV. The entire nation will be watching that one for sure, and rightfully so. It just stinks that, just to be blunt, it just stinks that, again, that game is at Baltimore for the 4th straight year in primetime instead of Cincinnati getting another home primetime game. And I know there's been a lot of talk about AFC North primetime matchups and, how that's all worked out. But I think it was Paul Dehner that put it out there earlier today in terms of Jake Liskow put it out there that AFC North primetime games in the Zac Taylor era, road teams are 3-13 in those AFC North primetime games since 2019. During that time, Cincinnati has been on the road 7 times in AFC North games and hosted only one AFC North primetime game since 2019. They'll host their second this year against Pittsburgh, but that's a brutal stretch to ask a team to continue to have to do that. After this year, they're going to have 2 games at home and 8 on the road against in-division opponents on primetime. Again, a matchup that seemingly heavily favors that home team 3-13 over the last 6 years.
Yeah, what's the one thing I said last night that I couldn't handle in this schedule release? It's a 3rd year in a row, I guess more than that, but a 3rd year in a row in prime time in Baltimore after the way the last 2 went. Heartbreak in overtime on a 2-point conversion last year, and then obviously the risk the year before. And obviously now we're going back, and I got to watch this game sitting with the rest of my extended family. Man, the Bengals better be able to pull out a win in prime time on Thanksgiving in Baltimore. That's certainly one that I think most fans jump to on this schedule release and point out. I do think something interesting I looked up as you were talking there. We mentioned earlier in the show how rough that start is for the Bengals. The Bengals are underdogs in 4 of their first 6 games. Plus 1.5 at Minnesota, plus 2.5 at Denver, plus 1.5 at home against the Lions, and plus 2.5 at Green Bay, only favored in their first 2 games against the Browns and the Jaguars. That is a gauntlet to open up this season for a team that has not done well in that stretch of games. You're going to have to answer that bell early, and it doesn't get easier after that. Obviously, coming out of a stretch there, then you turn around and you have that home AFC North primetime game that you mentioned there, Craig. Finally, you get one, and hopefully early enough that there will be no changes made. It does seem like some of these Pittsburgh settlements in this schedule leads me to believe that Aaron Rodgers will probably be playing quarterback for the Steelers in that game.
You think they just casually happened to open the season at the New York Jets?
Yeah.
By coincidence?
I don't know. Maybe it's a Justin
like
Fields tie. No Aaron Rodgers to do with it. I don't know. But yeah, no, certainly connect some of those dots. And I think you can figure out who's playing quarterback.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because if you look at the Steelers game, I realize we're talking about the first 6 and how we're favorited. The Bengals are going to be favorites against Cleveland and Jacksonville, and then probably road dogs in the next 3 or 4. But that Pittsburgh game, if Aaron Rodgers is that quarterback, the start of the Steelers season at the Jets, then they get the Seahawks at home, then they're at the Patriots, and they get the Vikings at home, the Browns at home before they play the Bengals. There's no reason the Steelers, if Aaron Rodgers is their quarterback, despite how bad that team should be on paper,
right,
there's no reason that team shouldn't be 3-2 or 4-1 at that point going into that matchup on Thursday night. So if you do start slow, like we're worried about this Bengals team doing, you're going to be going up at a divisional opponent who is ahead of you in the standings potentially on Thursday night. That's a big matchup that could potentially shape how this season plays out. But yeah, it's good to get one at home. It just stinks that, we didn't get Baltimore at home. We have to go to Baltimore in prime time, but 4 primetime games, only one of them at home.
Yeah, certainly a shocker, and it seems like most of the flex candidates later in the season, specifically at Buffalo, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of options other than if you give us that second Baltimore game in primetime in Week 15 that the Bengals could even pick up another home primetime game. At least last year with the Broncos as that TBD date late in the year, they were able to add that one. I know it was 4:25 in the afternoon, but still a pseudo primetime game in a standalone slot on a Saturday on those double dates. I don't think Arizona is going to be good enough to justify one of those in Week 17. I think the only chance we might have is that Week 18 matchup with Cleveland. If the Bengals are not settled, and by that time, 17 weeks from that home opener, Shedeur Sanders is starting for the Cleveland Browns, and they're fighting for any kind of seeding in the playoffs. That could be a primetime game to round out the year in Cincinnati, as long as things aren't taken care of and starters are being rested.
Well, it's hard to imagine a scenario where Shedeur Sanders is starting on a team that's competing for playoff positioning.
That would require the other quarterbacks to play well, right?
Correct. And then, but not well enough to maintain their job despite jockeying for playoff position. Who knows? Maybe Shedeur comes out of training camp and wins the starting quarterback job from Week 1, and we get Week 1 at Cleveland against rookie Shedeur Sanders,
certainly
trying to show the world that he deserved to be a better draft pick than the 5th round. Or maybe we never see Shedeur Sanders play in the NFL to begin with. Who knows?
We'll see what happens, but a lot of questions to be asked and a lot of time to ask them. I love that the NFL gives us this schedule just a few weeks into May, and we can sit here and plot records and how we get to the playoffs and everything else for the next however many months. The NFL is just the gift that keeps on giving. I don't know any other league that can make a schedule release with the opponents you already know such a major event. But shout out to Goodell and all the boys at the NFL office. They do a phenomenal job giving us content to talk about. Craig, thank you so much for joining me. Those are the 18 games for the Cincinnati Bengals. You think 18-0? We both there at 18-0?
Are either of us there?
17-0, 18 weeks. I'm looking at the numbers next to the.
Well, even still, 17-0.
No. Look,
we're
going to lose Week 1 to Cleveland and then win out. So 16-1.
Is that what you got? Okay.
Yeah, that's close.
Look, I'm gonna just quick schedule rundown. I'm gonna go out on a limb and be optimistic here, Jacob. I know
love
that's
that.
not the way of Chatterbox Sports.
That.
We're never optimistic around here, right?
Right.
We're gonna win. The Bengals are gonna win against Cleveland. They're gonna win against Jacksonville. That's no doubt. No doubt. We get started off fast. We're gonna go to Minnesota. JJ McCarthy's still working his way into the starting role. They beat the Vikings. They fall to Denver on Monday Night Football in a good game, but they're gonna fall there. They come back home. They bounce back against Detroit. They pick up a victory against the Lions. Then they go to Green Bay. They beat Jordan Love. They come home. They pick up the win against Pittsburgh, beat the Jets in Chicago. Of course, that puts them at 8-1 at the bye week, Jacob. 8-1.
That feels good. That feels good to me.
Then they come out of the bye week sluggish. They drop at Pittsburgh, come home, get their revenge at home against New England. They pick up that win there. Of course, they fall on the road to Baltimore because that's what happens in the AFC North.
Of course.
They fall to Buffalo. They fall to Baltimore. And then they win out to end it. I've got 5 losses on the calendar, 12-5 to finish it. Puts them as the first wild card team. I think Baltimore wins the AFC North.
Same record, I would presume. 12-5. I'm sure you haven't looked at their schedule all the way through, but that would be
I haven't looked at their schedule to know, but somewhere in that range, 12-5, 13-6, 13-4. But either way, in my hypothetical situation here, they win both of the matchups against the Bengals and have that tiebreaker. So all works out in the end for Baltimore. But
would be a tough pill to swallow to not win the division at 12 wins. Would be a tough pill to swallow.
It would be. What do you got for the schedule?
I had 11-6. Very similar win-loss. I did have a loss to Cleveland in Week 18, but that was under the assumption that we had the division locked up before then because I had us splitting with Baltimore. So I had the assumption there. So 12-5 makes sense along those lines for me as well. Very similar losses. I did have them picking up the win against Pittsburgh and then losing to Miami in Sunday Night Football. So very, very similar schedule there with, just losses a little later in the season.
The Ravens, just looking at, they could win 15 games this year.
Yeah, and I think they probably could.
Their schedule is set up for them to win for sure. They've got obviously very similar opponents, but they start the season at home against the Lions and then at the Chiefs, but then they get the Texans, Rams, Bears, Dolphins in their next 4 before going to Minnesota and playing the Vikings, but then they come back. They get the Browns, Jets before the Bengals, Steelers, Bengals. And then they end the season with the Patriots, the Packers, and then the Steelers. So very easily could end up in that 14 or 15 win range for the Ravens. Or the Bengals could beat them both times and they could end up with 12 and the Bengals could end up with 14.
And that's where I like our heads to be at. I had one last thing I wanted to bring up in discussion with the schedule. We did know this before the order was announced. We knew the opponents, obviously, but I do think it's something that's interesting to note. There's only one team in the NFL this season that will travel less than 10,000 miles through the 18 weeks of the NFL regular season, and that team is the Cincinnati Bengals. Do you think that plays any kind of role in the success the Bengals could or could not have this season? Is that as big of a positive as some sites and opinions are making it out to be?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does.
I agree.
Think not only does the distance they're traveling play into it, but the fact that they have 3 home games before their bye week, which comes right before their game at Pittsburgh, lines up really well for them too. It's tough. This schedule is built out to be very streaky. This team could have the opportunity to win 2, lose 5, win 3, lose 4. Like, it could be very streaky for this team all season long. The lack of travel is certainly going to benefit them. As you look at the NFL schedule, travel is something that always gets talked about, especially international teams. For the first time ever in the NFL season, we have a team who's playing back-to-back international games this year. So, yeah, I do think it plays into it a part. I also think that their road game, they only have 1 road game in the last 4 weeks of the season, and it's at Miami, right? So I think there's a lot of things that play out in the Bengals' favor with this schedule, despite the other challenges and disappointments, I guess, that we see with the schedule. There are a lot of positives for the Bengals as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Maybe not the order we necessarily wanted for the opponents we already knew, but no reason to lose any optimism as we enter the heat, I would say, of the offseason for the Cincinnati Bengals and prepare for the 2025 regular season that will kick off on September 7th in Cleveland. Bengals versus Browns is the opener. 4 primetime games for the Bengals at Denver Week 4 on Monday Night Football. Pittsburgh at home Week 7, Thursday Night Football. Thanksgiving night Week 13 in Baltimore. And Week 16, Sunday Night Football in Miami. Bye week, Week 10, and a lot of fun in between. We'll be here to take you through the entirety of the season. Craig, thank you for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Hoo day, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Hoo day.